to the Kemetic How-To Guide for Egyptian pagan and Kemetic practitioners. I'm your host, Sharon. It's been a long summer. I had to do a lot of extra work, and so I haven't been able to update things, but I'm about to start doing some new episodes, so we can call this Season 4 of the Kemetic How-To Guide. And since Samhain / Halloween is coming up, I figured I would do a recap of some Egyptian festivals that would correspond with this time of the year, and Egyptian festivals in general. I discuss a lot of Egyptian holidays in both Following the Sun and Circle of the Sun. Following the Sun, that's meant to be sort of a primer, and a lot of people who, I'm interested in Egyptian deities, Egyptian worship, but I don't know anything about it. This is where you start. And I also discuss not just the Egyptian calendar, but also what holidays would have close Wiccan equivalents for Sabbats. And in Circle of the Sun, a lot of things that I couldn't talk about in Following the Sun I put in here. I gave some examples of rituals, some more historical background, what were things that ancient Egyptians did to observe particular holidays. And folks who might be more of a Kemetic persuasion, if you didn't find what you were looking for in Following the Sun, Circle of the Sun's probably going to have it. If not, just message me, tell me what things you still want to learn more about, because I'm still writing and trying to, do more books. And also I realize that there are two different audiences that I have for both the books and the videos, being, Wiccans, and general paganism, and then the more straight-up Kemetics. Next episode I'm going to talk a little bit more about what's the difference between a Tamarin Wiccan and a Kemetic Reconstructionist, because that's a very common question that I get. So tune in next time. I try to do episodes every 2 weeks, and hopefully your questions will be answered. So, about Egyptian festivals. The first Festival of the Dead actually would have been a couple of months ago, and that is the Wag Feast. If you're reading older books, like a lot of Budge's work, which, for your own sanity, I hope you're not reading them, it's spelled like a O or U-A-K or something like that, but it's the Wag Feast. And it's translated as the Supply Feast. That's when they would go and they would offer food to the dead, offer drinks, they would offer wine to Osiris, and they would put flower garlands on statues and tablets of the deceased. This was seen as like the Jubilee of Osiris. Other sources say this is when he sailed to Abydos. And they also would honor Anubis during this time as well. Depending on when the start of the year is for you, if you observe Egyptian New Year in the middle of July, then the Wag Feast will be about August 3rd. If you observe opening of the year and the beginning of August, then bump it by about 2 weeks, so it'd be middle of August. And either way, it falls close enough to Lammas that if you're trying to fit something into a Wiccan format, the Wag Feast would be a good thing, for Lammas, because instead of lighting bonfires, which is often done at Lammas, you can light torches or candles for Osiris and for the dead, and you can offer bread and wine to Osiris, and have cakes for Osiris as the Corn King. The next festival, and of course there's also things that you could do. If you're more of a straight-up Kemetic, you can, do that. And I've got rituals for the Wag Feast and for the Jehutet and Circle of the Sun. The next feast, depending again on your calendar, it's almost like the Eastern Orthodox Church and then the Western Christian churches, when there are two different dates for Easter and things like that. You can almost say there are two different dates for Egyptian feasts, because some groups still they use the modern rising of Sirius, which now occurs in early August, and others like myself, I use the historical rising of Sirius, which was mid-July. So depending on when you're going, the Khoiak Feast would be in either early November, or some groups observe it in early December. This was observed at the time of the year when the Egyptians would start planting, because the floodwaters had receded so they could start planting the crops. Well, what do you do when you're planting seeds? You're burying them in the earth. And so this is when they would observe, the Festival of the Dead. And Osiris, in his association with the grain, he was being buried because he had died, and then was going to resurrect, as Lord of the Underworld. Khoiak comes from the older Egyptian words ka, which means ka, or soul upon soul. So sort of like, All Souls Day. And I also mentioned the Sokar feast that took place at Khoiak. Was the name of the whole month, and as well as the feast. But one of the many parts of it that went on during that whole month of festivities was the Sokar feast, and that was when the statue of Osiris at Abydos would make a procession into the cemetery in the desert, just outside of Abydos, and that's when they would perform funerary rites for him. You'd have two women who were playing, Isis and Nephthys, who were, his mourners, and there was a passion play. People would play the parts of the followers of Osiris, and then there were the followers of Set, and they would beat up on the followers of Set. And then after the nightly vigil, they would have a triumphal procession back to the Temple of Abydos. And obviously this matches very closely with, for those of you who are, more of the Wiccan persuasion, it matches with Samhain and I really haven't thought a whole lot about how you would incorporate it with the Oak King and the Holly King, but I'm sure with a little bit of thought somebody could figure out, is it Osiris and Set, or is it Osiris and Horus, or how would you work that out? Some things don't match up exactly. Like I know there's one group here that for their Samhain, they have the high priest will draw down the crone. High priestess will draw down the crone, and I'm not really sure how that would work. I suppose you could use Isis in that aspect, but I don't really know if very many Egyptian goddesses could be seen as having a crone aspect per se. They, didn't really age. They, were always, seen in a fairly young, or a mother aspect. They didn't have the cycle quite like the idea of the triple goddess. So not everything is going to match up exactly if you're trying to, incorporate things into, the Wiccan format. You have to take some liberties. For those who are followers of Set, and I know a few, there's actually a couple here that are Isean, and Isean is Egyptian pagan, but it's kind of descended from ceremonial magic. It uses a lot of Kabbalah and other things mixed in with the Egyptian rituals. But one individual, he was consecrated to Set, which meant he couldn't participate in any Osiris feasts. So instead what we did was the Feast of Sokar. Sokar, got a picture of him right here. This is the calendar I do for myself every year. Sokar is he came to be syncretized with Osiris. And so in later periods of Egyptian history, you had Osiris Sokar. But he began as a separate deity. He also had a festival at planting time. He had the ability to go between worlds, to cross between the living and the dead. And so they would have a funeral feast for him, and then a triumphal procession around the city of Memphis. So we did a Sokar feast one year for Samhain for our folks who, were Isean. The last Festival of the Dead actually will be in springtime. It was a harvest season for the Egyptians, but it would take place in late April or early May, and that's the beautiful Feast of the Valley. This was celebrated in Thebes, and it didn't really have anything to do with Osiris. This was Amun traveling across the river into the western valley, which was sacred to Hathor. Hatshepsut's temple at Deir el-Bahari and the Valley of the Kings, they're all part of that area that was dedicated to Hathor. And so families would go and they would visit the graves of their loved ones, the tombs, and they would bring food and they would drink a lot, because to them, drinking in a state of drunkenness, it wasn't a bad thing. And for them, that brought you closer to gods, closer to the blessed dead. So there probably was a lot of partying during the beautiful Feast of the Valley. But that's something that we can talk about more come springtime. So hopefully this will give you some ideas as you're planning for Samhain this year. And if somebody asks you, well, what are you going to be doing this year? You know, if you're like me, you've got a lot of pagan friends that don't really know anything about Egyptian. That's not their bag, but they know you'll be doing something and they want to know what it is. Hopefully now you've got some things you can tell them. So for the Kemetic How-To Guide, this is Sharon, wishing you Sanupti.